CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. There he is, folks. That's Erik Hupje, Road to Reliability. One of my favorite people to connect with here because not only does he get it, but he's going to help us today with something that I'm always wrestling with, and I kind of chirp about it, but he knows way better than me. So first of all, Erik Hupje, welcome back to CMMS Radio.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here. Always enjoy our conversations. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's so this was inspired by a post that Planner HQ had put out, and it was about planning the planner, and it had all these things listed, and we started throwing some comments around, and I was talking about how my perspective was that, if you're doing planning and you're hiring a planner and you've got all these extraneous nonsensical things that have nothing to do with it, how are you going to effectively plan? So I want to ask you just out of the gate, one, is it really true that planning and scheduling should be separate roles? If so, why? And then we want to mix in some CMMS there.
So I think what we need to do is we need to separate between the concept of a role and the individual. This is where it often goes wrong, right? So planning as itself is preparing work, right? It's preparing work for efficient and effective execution, which means that you have everything you need to do the job before you start the job. The parts, the materials, the tools, the procedures, the resources, the safety precautions, the access, everything is organized so that the tech, when he goes and do the job, can do the job without having to stand around for 2 hours waiting for isolations or a permit or whatever, right? That is planning, that is preparing the work for efficient execution. You typically want somebody who has a technical background, knowledge of the job to do that, because if you have never done that job, how are you going to prepare it, right? We'll talk a bit more about that maybe later, but I've seen a lot of industries trying to do this, and all that happens, it displaces that preparation to someone else, right? It typically is then a supervisor or a technician in the field who has to do the preparation, pass it on to the so-called planner, who then pastes it into the CMS. But that's what planning is about. It's preparing the work. It's a technical role. Scheduling is different in the sense it's about grouping work. It's about coordinating, building a schedule, loading to capacity, and everything else. It requires a level of understanding of what's happening in the plant, what work can you group. But if you have your CMS built well, that can help a lot with that. So typically I say is you do not need to have a strong technical background to be a good scheduler. In the past, we've actually trained up literally some admin assistants who had CMS background to become schedulers. And they were fantastic because they were very proactive, very diligent. And if they didn't know, they would ask, but they learned very quickly. So they were they became really good schedulers. So they're two very different things. Now, the reality then comes in. If you're a small plant, right, and you have, say, 5 to 10 technicians, you cannot afford to have a dedicated planner and a scheduler. That becomes just not realistic. So you have to combine them, right? I was recently in the US where they had a large number of small plants where they couldn't even justify having a full-time planner. So you then have to be realistic about what you can afford. If you're in a refinery where you have 500 technicians, you're going to have probably 20 planners and a whole bunch of schedulers, per plant and everything else. But in smaller plants, that's just not realistic. So you have to be clear about what you can afford. It's all very nice and wild to say, yeah, we need to have dedicated planners, we need to have dedicated schedulers, but the reality sets in, you go like, well, I can't justify that, right? And it's just important to understand the difference of those roles.
Well, I think, and we also, before we hit record, we're talking a little bit about the idea that any organization that starts at a certain level, and maybe even intentionally, is never going to grow to a point where they're going to have that extra available resource we call money to have a planner and a schedule. You're talking about, machine shops and 10 technicians. They'd love to, but it wouldn't even necessarily help them. It would be an unnecessary spend. But how do people approach the combined role so that it can, in fact, be productive and not impossible for that individual? Are there any strategies that you teach and guide people on to develop a planner that is also a scheduler that can be highly effective, or is that really hard to do?
It is hard to do. but lots of things in life are hard to do. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try and shouldn't do it, right? So there's a few things. One thing I always say to clients: first thing you need to do is understand what is causing your technicians to lose most of their productive time, right? And that's where you want to focus, because ultimately we do the planning and the scheduling so that we get efficiency, right? And we can execute work, and we can execute it effectively and properly. So if you spend time with your techs in the field and they say, right, okay, they're always waiting for materials, or they're always waiting on operations to put the isolations in place, or we always have miscommunication between the electrician and the mechanic shows up at a job and he can't do it because it isn't the electrical isolation in place, whatever it is, you say, right, those are our pain points. Now, is that a scheduling issue? Is that a planning issue? Usually it's a combination of two things, but you want to understand, okay, where is the biggest pain coming from? How do I fix that? Right? And that's the whole point ultimately is, whether you're big or small, whether you have a plan or a schedule or not, the concept of waste still applies, right? Your technicians can still waste a lot of time looking for parts, look at materials, because nobody told them beforehand what parts they needed for the job, or because, it turns out they actually needed a special tool that isn't, easily available, and they have to go and organize or potentially even rent it. Those kind of things still happen. And that's the kind of stuff you want to catch through planning and potentially through the scheduling. So in the intro or at the beginning, you said, that a lot of planners are burdened by extraneous things. And that's one of the big things I see when I spend time at sites and do site audits, and also in training, but especially when I do site assessments and really spend time to see what is really happening compared to what people say is happening or what they think is happening. You see so many planners being burdened by so much admin, right? I can give you some weird and wonderful example. One planner I recently spoke with, and I won't tell you where or what, but his job was to collect the mail and distribute it. Right? I've seen planners. Well, that wasn't his job. That was one of his many tasks, right? Let's be clear. But
Yeah.
the point is, where a lot of organizations are misusing the planner. The point of the planner role is really to enable efficiency and productivity in your maintenance team, right? By preparing work so they can execute it efficiently. If you not burden that planner with admin, with chasing up purchase orders, with chasing up invoices, invoice settlement, and all those kind of, the usual issue, because there's a discrepancy between the PO and the invoice, and now I've spent 2 weeks and I don't know how many hours trying to sort that out with finance. If that kind of stuff lands on the planner's desk, guess what? The planner's not planning, and so your technicians out in the field suffer. So one of the things that is usually the most important is to take that, excuse my French, but to take that crap away from the planner, and see if it needs doing, because very often it's stuff that actually doesn't need doing at all. It's just a broken process. So fix the process, streamline the process, potentially automate the process, or delegate it to someone. If it really does need doing, see if you can give some of that admin to somebody else in the building, right? And that's another thing I always say to people: say, look, you've got a plant where there's, yeah, you may only have 5 or 10 technicians, but how many other people are on the plant, in the office, day in, day out, right? Who can help with scheduling? Do you have somebody in admin, or do you have somebody in operations who could be a good scheduler, right? Don't just constrain your resources to just maintenance. Now, I know it's difficult if you're a maintenance manager. You can't just go and poach somebody, but you need to have the conversation with your plant manager or plant director.
I also am thinking about, and I bring this up a lot in different scenarios when it comes to, skilled trade shortage, or we need to bring someone in to help with this, but we can't justify the hire. And I like this idea of going out to, maybe local technical colleges or junior colleges where people are doing something related to this, where they can come in and do kind of like internship work, almost intern apprentice type stuff as it relates to being a scheduler, to offload a lot of that admin, because those are trainable. Like, they don't necessarily have to be maintenance people in order to learn how to appropriately schedule. And that could free up the planner as well. But they would still have to take the work, form those relationships with the uni or the college or whatever. And they just don't have the time. So that's one of the other things that I keep hearing for all of these years, where we know what to do, but we can't do it because we don't have the people to do it. And we're trying to wear multiple hats. This is the reality
Yeah,
of
but
business.
yes, it is. But if I'm really honest, the reality is also that most organizations have plenty of people. They're just not using them wisely and properly. All right,
That's right.
there's a lot of busy work happening in small companies and in big companies where you go like, why? That doesn't add any value. Get rid of it, right? In the refinery, I was in the Middle East not long ago. Every part, the refineries consisted of 6 plants. All the plants had warehouses, and all the plants were fenced off. Some warehouses were within the plant boundary, some were not. So for one of the plants, their warehouse was not within their plant boundary. So to get a part from their warehouse, it had to go through another plant boundary. The plant boundary has police and everything else, the security. So every part movement has to have a form with it saying this is authorized, blah, blah, blah. Guess who is pulling all that together? The planner, right? So the planner is busy putting all this paperwork together, paperwork that really from a company perspective doesn't add any value. Now, this was a little bit more complicated because the security is provided by external security forces and everything else. But it's just, if you look at it from a business perspective, it's pure waste, right? And so you need to think about, okay, how can we eliminate those kind of things?
Interestingly, it seems to be the number one thing you can always say, focus on, try to find and eliminate, and that's that waste. In any of this, when it comes to maintenance, how maintenance enables and contributes to reliability, which is going to give you your throughput, which is going to give you your top line and your bottom line, but the stuff that's in between, the efficiencies are there if you're willing to look, find, and then do something about it. I'm curious, when you do these facility walkdowns, where you start. For example, would you go into a facility where you're going to do a walk down to try to help them find these opportunities, the efficiency opportunities to eliminate waste, maybe for a planner? Would you say, hey, can I take a look at your CMMS? Or would you just straighten away, hit the plant floor and start talking to people?
Normally, the way I do it is fairly structured. So they typically 4 or 5 days, sometimes up to 2 weeks, depending on that. So the refinery I did in the Middle East was 2 weeks because it was a massive plant with literally 500-600 technicians and therefore dozens of planners and everything else. And they wanted a very detailed analysis. But basically what I do is I start with, say, give me your documentation, right? Tell me how your maintenance process is actually supposed to work. That already gives me a very good idea of where things might be going. And then I know that typically what's on paper is not what I'm going to find in reality, right? But the paper already tells. Then it says, right, give me these reports from your CMS. So give me your notifications, give me work orders, give me this. So I do a bit of data analysis. That will tell me a lot as well. And then it's, okay, these are the people I want to talk to. So what I typically do is I attend all their routine maintenance meetings. So their daily meetings, their daily prioritization meetings, their schedule lock-in, their schedule drafting meeting, the backlog meeting, whatever they have. I'll sit in the corner, I'll be quiet, and I just take notes. I don't ask any questions, I just observe. And it's so interesting how quickly people forget you're there, right? If you just sit in a corner and you're not there, within a few minutes, the meeting is back to normal behavior and everything becomes visible. And then what I do is I basically spend typically at least an hour with all the key people. So a planner, a scheduler, the maintenance manager, the technicians, operations, whoever, depending on how the organization is structured. And then as I flesh out the issues, I'll say, hey, I want to talk more to this person or to these people or to that part of the organization to find out what's going on.
And the reason I wanted to ask is I think it's important for people to understand that not only that's how you do what you do, but if they pay close enough attention, it's that you have a structured process, that you, having done this so often and uncovered the right kind of problems, delivered the right kind of impact, that's where you can make a difference. And they can certainly emulate that. But I do think they should, that people that don't exactly know how to do this and find their own problems need to work with someone like you that's what you do. Kind of like a doctor of your maintenance and reliability processes within your organization, regardless of what type it is. And it does transcend the plant floor, the large fields where all the oil is, the oil fields, into that administration area as well, because maintenance principles would apply just the same, because it's waste. And if you're looking and you're diligent, like you say, you can find, and if you do something, you'll see the improvements. It's really another thing that when you describe this and we think about the post, We think about the planning versus planning and scheduling for one person. There's a lot of on repeat noise people think about the basics. And I think a lot of what I'm saying is, why and how do the basic fundamentals make all the difference as it relates to what you do and how your clients or people in these manufacturing production environments can thrive? What do they keep missing? What do they keep missing? And why do you think it just doesn't ever change the messaging we're so strong on?
So the things that keep being missed, that's an easy answer. Well, relatively easy. Why we
Okay.
keep having the issue, it gets a little bit more complicated. But the key things, the key processes I see going wrong is what we cover in our framework. That is what I kind of learned through my own experience, but also actually discovered through the work that Winston Ledet did when he developed the manufacturing game, right? But basically, there's three key processes we focus on with clients. It's planning and scheduling, preventive maintenance, defect elimination, root cause analysis. Then we support that with leadership and culture. The planning and scheduling is really important because it creates a stable working environment. Most maintenance teams are still very reactive, right? Firefighting, etc. If you set up a good planning and scheduling process, that takes a lot of that away. It doesn't solve the root causes often, but it takes a lot of it away, and you get control of the work environment. You get stable working environment. You reduce the stress. You reduce the frustrations, and people go like, okay, now we can breathe a bit and we can start fixing some of the stuff. So that's almost always where we start. The other one is the preventive maintenance, because most PM programs that we see are very wasteful. And as we just said, most maintenance teams are very constrained on their resources. So if you now have a PM program, you're doing a lot of tasks that don't add value, you're just wasting your time and money. Right. So one of the key things you need to do is eliminate all the work that doesn't need doing and add in what is missing. And that's what your PM program needs to do. That doesn't solve everything, because typically most plans have a lot of inherent defects from construction, from design, and everything else. And that's where root cause analysis and defect elimination come in. We usually do say to clients, do that last. Well, not last, but do that after the other two, because to be good at root cause analysis and defect elimination, you need to have built a culture where you're focused on learning, you're focused on continuous improvement, where you accept making decisions based on data, where you look for systemic issues. If you're very early in the journey and you're still very much reactive, what you typically find in reactive maintenance environments or reactive plant environments is there's a lot of stress, right? There's a lot of frustration, and that leads to very quickly a blame culture. And in that kind of environment, doing good root cause analysis doesn't really happen, because it's Joe the fitter. He made a mistake. Okay, yeah, Joe made a mistake, but why did Joe make the mistake, right? That why doesn't get answered, never gets looked at in that environment. So you want to first create that stability. So those are the three processes we focus on. And what is interesting is that the research that was done by DuPont and A.T. Kearney in the 1990s that led to the manufacturing game eventually, they quantified the benefit of those steps. And it basically showed that the best manufacturing plants in the benchmarking they did was 140 plants. The best and the best achieved 98% or so by focusing on those three things, whereas the typical plant was achieving 30, 83, 84%. So it was about a 15% gain, all right, by focusing on those three things combined. Reason we add in the leadership and culture is one, you need leadership to start driving the change. Nothing happens if you don't have somebody in the organization say, hey, this is no longer good enough. I'm tired of working like this. There is a better way. Let's get moving, right? That's what the leadership needs to bring. But then you need to sustain it through culture, because if you don't get this embedded in your way of working, in your behaviors, in your priorities, in your values as a company, that this is the way we run, then it just falls apart when that leader who's been driving it moves away. And we have all seen that with all kinds of different initiatives, right? So leadership and culture basically keeps it together. When you've got those three things going, you will see a dramatic turnaround. And this has been one of my frustrations with a lot of things that's out there in the world, on web, on LinkedIn, and everything else, is we make things way more complicated than it needs to be. Do those three things and you will see a dramatic improvement. Then all the other stuff, the IoT, the AI and ML and everything else, all the fancy bits and pieces and all the different kind of technologies and techniques can come later. So those are the three things you need to do.
I couldn't agree more. And it's not, there's a theme when I have these conversations with someone like yourself, some of my other regulars on the show talk about George Williams, Joe Anderson, Howard Penrose, on and on like that. They will all isolate very similar things to what you just said, and they will almost always say, if you're doing that right there, you're probably better than, and it's typically a very high percentage of other organizations. And then when you do that and you do those things, you must always, always keep an eye on it and make it sustainable somehow and have some kind of contingency planning. But the contingency planning never works because the person leaves and then everything starts falling apart, and then you try to rebuild it back, right? Like if you have that leadership champion that gets it, and our friend Brian Bieski, he likes to talk about this role that nobody's using and nobody's hiring, called the chief maintenance officer, to keep everyone accountable, whether you're a tech company with these great tools you could use later when you're really mature, or if you're doing the basics so that they can connect the dots from the plant floor to the boardroom. All of this, it's this thing about, we're all saying it, we're shouting it. Brian will go in and go louder for the back so they hear you in the back, right? And I've had some people come at me and go, how come you guys are always talking about the same things? And I say, well, because that's what we're not doing well around the world. Here and there, yes. And then they bring someone in that really knows, and you help them out, and you get them on the road to reliability, and then their champion leaves after you've already finished and you're out doing this, and then they got to call you back, and you got to start all over again. And we're not picking on people. We're saying, don't give up, keep trying, and try to find that opportunity to improve what you're doing, because it's totally possible with or without a CMMS. You don't need a CMMS to do proper maintenance. You do those things you were just talking about, don't introduce new defects, operate machines properly, don't use the wrong materials, make sure you're preventing degradation through proper lubrication programs. And precision maintenance is an absolute that you should be doing, because everybody thinks, well, we're not advanced enough for precision maintenance. And Joe Anderson will tell you right now, if you just did that, you would see amazing return. So I just like to ask these general questions that people are thinking about and have someone that really knows talk about it. So this has been great. So to close out on this idea of planning versus scheduling, it really is planning and scheduling, and provided enough resource and workload, they should necessarily be separate departments with multiple players on each side. But when you're a smaller organization, you are going to have to combine those roles, but be aware of the administrative, nonsensical, wasteful work. And on those PMs, please, everybody, optimize those. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, look, you need the planning piece, you need the scheduling piece, right? If you're a small plant, you're going to have to combine it with one person. That's just the reality. If you're a big plant, you can afford to separate them, and I would normally strongly recommend you do, because they require different skills. And what we almost always see is you have a combined planner scheduler, they will lean towards one of the two, and typically it's the scheduling and the planning suffers. So yeah, that's it. And indeed, if you have a lot of PMs, optimize them.
Yeah, that's the sometimes we, and I'm saying people in general, are moving and doing the things that we're told or that come up on our schedule and how we're measured. And we may not know that we've done this PM 3 extra times this year and we only needed to do it the one time. That's where you need the data and the insights. So that's where a system of record and some of these other technologies can come into play. And we managed to get through an episode without saying the big, bad, ugly word that's so popular. So we're not going to do it. Erik Hupje, thanks for being here with me. And if people want to get in touch with you, they can find you on LinkedIn and connect, or they can go to Road to Reliability or Reliability Academy.
Yep, yeah. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend, for being here with me once again on CMMS Radio.
Thanks, Greg.
You got it. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.